Sonnets were a popular form of expression during the Renaissance and Reformation period, and they were one of the contributory factors to the Reformation. Many of you may know my earliest thesis was on the cause of the Reformation of the 16th century, whether politics, social, economic, or philosophical. I postulated that all these factors caused the Reformation. It did not result from Martin Luther's 95 Thesis alone being penned to the Catholic Church doors of Wittenberg, but it was one of the major factors. Sonnets like Thomas Watson's Passionate Century of Love or Edmund Spenser's Amoretti changed the perception of the masses until the misunderstood Shakespeare's sonnets were published in 1609. Just as the poet of Shakespeare's sonnets, my earliest dissertation forecasted a reformation in the 21st century, where all the political, social, economic, and philosophical catalysts will align. Welcome to this episode of the historical background and the theme of Shakespeare's sonnets. I'm Peter Matthews. If you haven't watched the first 6 episodes, I encourage you to watch them in sequence because I believe William Shakespeare could not have penned the 154 golden Zoharic sonnets simply because the primary source documents, or the 2 major source documents, were written in Aramaic and Hebrew, one printed by Rabbi Isaac Bassano of Mantua, Italy. The poet had a mastery of Jewish Kabbalah. This precludes William Shakespeare. Early 17th century was a very different period where many women were forbidden to read by their husbands, instead forthrightly told they are to dedicate their time to the needs of the husband and their children. But many modern scholars depict the unoccupied wife in this period as one with desire, love, and sex on their mind. But having read almost all of the writings of the early women writers during this period, I discovered they were not preoccupied with sex at all. It was the mannerism of the predominantly male authors. Women were consumed with piety, beauty, ethics, wisdom, fortitude, and honour, where their sonnets, poetry, and plays were their means of expressing themselves. It is clear from Emilia Bassano's writings that she viewed all men as evil vipers, rapists, vile creatures who would take whatever they desire. Women were often drawn into a debate between the state-imposed Protestantism and Catholicism purely because King Henry VIII decided to divorce his wife, and the Catholic Church would not consent. Hieronymus Bassano of the Scuola Grande di San Marco was one such Jewish scholar that King Henry VIII turned to, where his sons had already frequented England for trade, music, mass, and several performances. One of my Venetian friends pointed out recently, scuola means school, but it was also used as an abbreviation for shul, or synagogue in Venice during the 16th and early 17th century. Some Venetian synagogues still bear the name scuola today. Early 17th century English women wanted to understand religion, theology, philosophy, the nature of God, the afterlife, and of course literature, to help them make their own decisions. They no longer accepted the imposed view of their husband. Elizabeth Carey, Viscountess of Falkland, was the first woman in England to have an original play in English published in her own name. She was the wife of Henry Carey, the first Viscount of Falkland, who happened to be the descendant of Sir William Carey, born 1436 of Cockington, who was also the ancestor of Henry Carey, the first Baron of Hunsdon. Like Emilia Bassano, Elizabeth Carey was a keen theologian and philosopher, fluent in Spanish, Italian, Latin, Hebrew, and Transylvanian. It was a time of change where early 17th century London was filled with doting poets and potential playwrights, all vying to earn the patronage of a high and lofty, self-absorbed king, or in a female poet's case, his renowned empress, the noble woman, Great Britain's queen, to quote Emilia Bassano. On the 20th of May, 1609, when the Sonnets were published, the Scottish King James I of England was on the throne, and Anne of Denmark was his queen. Anne was a strong, noble woman of power, principle, and a patron of poets, playwrights, and performers. Unfortunately, early historians relied on the drunken ramblings of her husband, who called her weak and a tool in the hands of clever and unscrupulous persons. Had they read the remarks of the Venetian ambassador to the Doge of Venice, they would have learned she is intelligent and prudent and knows the disorders of the government, in which she has no part, though many hold that, as the king is most devoted to her, she might play as large a role as she wished. I believe Queen Anne became an ambassador for women in England who stood opposed to her husband. King James I was provoked by the brilliant Jewish Kabbalistic play of Macbeth, depicting him as the mad murdering king, consumed by ambition, guilt, and paranoia. You see, in real life, King James, and I quote, personally supervised the torture of women accused of being witches because of his own paranoia of a witch conspiracy that threatened his throne. His mother, Mary Stuart, Queen of Scotland, had her own share of struggles between her Catholic faith and her Protestant Scotland, led by the reformer John Knox, where she forcibly abdicated her throne on the 24th of July, 1567, to James VI. A boy 1 month over a year old, who was appointed regent on the 20th of December 1567, during the time Baptista Bassano and his brothers served Queen Elizabeth I. You see, James was a king without a father or mother, disturbed by his father's execution in 1567 and his mother's incarceration and subsequent execution in 1587. One of the major sources of the play Macbeth was King James' own 1597 dissertation of demonology, based upon the detailed witch trials of 1590, published in News from Scotland. This particular dissertation demonised ordinary God-fearing women who prophesied as being necromancers, and one who prophesied from the dead via what King James calls maesters and commanders, black and unlawful science of magi, referring to the forbidden tree.
With haste.
He went on to root out the rudiments and schools that teach astrology, the arts, alluding to Kabbalah, such as the Bassano schools of Venice and London. Emilia Bassano herself taught and educated children of diverse or numerous persons of worth and understanding. In other words, she had a school that taught nobility. 16th century England had a very low opinion of women and an even lower opinion of Israelites who were banned from England by an edict of expulsion in 1290 AD. If any female teacher was found to have been educating students on Jewish Kabbalah in England, or any suggestion she might have taught on the light of God, it could easily be misconstrued as consulting Lucifer, the angel of light, God's enemy, as King James I called him. Then she would have been rounded up and tortured until she confessed before being hanged or burnt to death. Very sad indeed, that period. William Shakespeare had asked Carey, "Tell what she that witched thee, I swear it shall go no farther," before he dealt his own form of justice, slandering Emilia Bassano's good name and lining her up for a violent beating. Consequently, the female author of the Sonnets intentionally wrote the Sonnets with another book as a code to unlock the true meaning behind the Sonnets. I believe two of the major sources were selected by the female author with intent as a slap in the face to King James I. The king made it personal, so Emilia Bassano made it personal. She returned with her own academic response, including, might I add, Henry Cornelius Agrippa's 1529 declamation on the nobility and preeminence of the female sex, where Agrippa declared there was a prejudice against women that was not based upon sex but upon social conditioning, education, and the prejudices of their more powerful oppressors. Emilia admitted that she referred to this book in Willoughby His Visa. She wrote, as I take it out of Cornelius Agrippa. I discovered this afterwards, actually. En salve, just as Agrippa divided his declamation into 10 parts, Emilia followed Agrippa's lead into 10 sections from the 10 Sephirot of the Tree of Life by writing a dedication to 10 ladies, including Queen Anne of Denmark, plus the virtuous reader and the doubtful reader, though this was the outer layer to conceal the code beneath to unlock Shakespeare's sonnets. Why? Because the Babylonian Talmud, Rosh Hashanah 32a and Megillah 21b tells us the world was created with 10 utterances of "and God said" in Genesis chapter 1, which began a debate because there is only 9 plus Bereshit, or in the beginning. Fortunately for Emilia, the king was not astute enough to realize it in her day. And frankly, had William Shakespeare understood the meaning, he too would have been executed. So now for the theme of the sonnets. Well, I've touched on this already. Bereshit, in the beginning, God created male and female, with perfectly planned differences. He considered and choreographed mankind for 2,000 years before he began creation, spending time considering the mutual attraction, the smiles, the hair, the curves, considering every aspect. Sexuality was planned by God from the very beginning, with everything fashioned around the assembly of Israel and what they would become. And the book of love poems God inspired King Solomon to write, the Song of Songs, or the Songs of Solomon, which are about a young man and a young woman and the desire for each other, just as Christ had a desire for his bride. Their communication was vibrant, natural, and filled with love. I am black but beautiful. Song of Songs 1:5. Being totally unashamed of their feelings for one another. His description of her as Israel was so amazing. Like a rose among thorn, so is my beloved among the maidens. Song of Songs 2:1-2. In reply, she delights in his masculinity, like the finest apple tree in the orchard. Song of Songs 2:3. Even when the passion was rising, she asks, promise me, O women of Jerusalem, by the gazelles and wild deer, not to awaken love until the time is right. Song of Songs 2:7. I wore the hat, my hunting hat, because it fits the narrative. They shared every emotion. As the story develops, we must always be careful not to catch all of the foxes, those little foxes, before they ruin the vineyard of love. Song of Songs 2:15. For love is as strong as death, its jealousy as enduring as the grave. Song of Songs 8:6. This is the underlying theme of the sonnets, and the Zoharic commentary skillfully summarized by Amelia into 154 sets of 14 verses bar Sonnet 99 and 126 for very good reason. This was covered in episode 1 if you haven't watched it. Amelia selected aspects of the commentaries of Torah from Zohar Adash, or New Zohar, and Zohar al-Shir HaShirim, or Zohar on the Song of Songs, Midrash Hanilim, or the Concealed Midrash, and an addendum called Tosefta of the Living as Sadakim, or righteous or just men and just women, by Rabbi Hanasi, with a focus on the feminine divine aspects of God, specifically Shekinah, Matronita, Adonai, and Va Yud He Vav He, all compiled into 16 parts, corresponding to the 16 parts of our Mishnah. She also delved into the most prominent Israelite women of the Bible who were involved in the redemption of Israel, particularly those who ascend as angels. Amelia drew parallels from the 10 Sephirot, the 10 utterances, the Hebrew letters, and the 10 mysteries of Ein Sof, or God, so gracefully described as heavenly denizens, celestial holy ones, by Joel Hecker in his Zoharic commentary of the Mishnah, as a bird that descends daily, arousing in the garden, flaming in her wings, referring to Shekinah. The sonnets and salve are an extremely complex, layered Zoharic work comparable to Rabbi Isaac Luria and Rabbi Chaim Vital, where Emilia used secret codes in Salve Deus Rex Judiorum that connect with the sonnets to unravel the meaning of each Zoharic mystery. Emilia sowed a seed for Israel's glory, like the seed of fine purple silk, wrapping itself within, weaving itself a palace, producing the finest silk garment. Yet nobody in over 400 years unraveled the mysteries of the sonnets until now. Following the lead of the 2nd century Tanaic sage and author of the authentic Zohar, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Emilia broke the sonnets into 13 parts from sonnets 1 to 126. Then added 3 prophetic parts from sonnets 127 to 154, which teach on the Jewish parashot on Zohar Dash and Midrash Ne'ilim, chapter by chapter, then writes prophetically on the age of the woman, beginning on the 29th of November 2020, as prophesied by Emilia Bassano over 400 years ago. Wow. The crescendo to the sonnets is actually in Salve Deus Rex Judiorum. Doesn't finish with the sonnets. This is why it's so amazing. Emilia never gave up being a teacher, but instead she turned to teaching Merkabah Kabbalah, meaning the development of the tradition of the heavenly chariot to all the world. She foretold how God looked down upon thy poor degree, in other words, the plight of her people, and the woman exiled with her, meaning Shekinah. Like Mary, Shekinah was servant, mother, wife, and nurse to Jesus, who freed us from the curse of sin and death. In Emilia's teaching poetry of Merkabah Kabbalah, she begins with sonnet 1 to 19 on Bereshit, in the beginning, a work of creation through to maturity at 20, connecting to her rape. Yeah. This is designed to give the student of Kabbalah an understanding of the Hebrew letters and the keys to understand the upper and lower worlds and fix them into some sort of mind map to guide them on a journey towards salvation in the world to come. Sonnets 20 to 25 teach students on the woman, known as Shekinah in Parashat Lech Lecha, along with prophecy, Merkabah, the heavenly chariot, how souls descend to the throne and are transformed into angels, and the inner workings of the upper world interacting with angels and God. Yes, it's extremely deep. Sonnets 26 to 30 introduce us to the maidens in Parashat Vayira and continue to deepen our teaching on the work of the 4 living creatures. Heot, angels that are cylindrical spears that form the chariot, referring to Merkabah Kabbalah, or the study of the divine chariot, comprised of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and King David. They are the 4 legs of the chariot. We investigate the upper world, the 50 gates of Bina, the Lamed Vovnik who underpin the world on a daily basis, the rebuilding of the temple, the raising of Adonai from the dust, the raising up of the palace of the woman to her rightful place as equal in the house of God. For it is written, for the earth's pillars belong to Adonai. On them he has placed the world. 1 Samuel 2:8. As Yud-He-Vav-He goes out by day, Matronita is the mistress, or the woman of the house by night. Matronita is Shekinah and all of her train of serving angels in the upper world or the house of God. The Bible says, and this is in the New Testament, and you'll find it also in the Zohar of Mantua on the Torah, as above, as below. Matthew 6:10, directly from the Aramaic. Whatever happens in the heavens also occurs on earth, and vice versa. If there is a stirring of the waters in the heavens, there is a stirring of mercy or judgment on earth. If Matronita is aroused, it is a time for women to also be aroused on earth. It is a time for all women to stand as just women, or sadakim, or sadakis actually, for women, meaning righteous women who know God and can wield the power of God. There's many throughout history. Will you be one of them? What is the power of God? It's contained in the Hebrew letters of Torah. A wise woman builds her house, but a foolish woman tears it down with her own hands. Proverbs 14:1. It is about a tortuous path called night, where a woman can walk in wisdom and fulfill Torah, and each Hebrew letter will be a blessing to her. Or she can walk in darkness and the terrors of night, and the demons torment her and attack her along the way. This comes from Song of Songs 3:7-8. I've just expounded on it. Emilia left us a clue in her own work of Salve Deus Rex Judarum that scholars should have investigated more thoroughly over the last 4 centuries, which would have led them to the original sources. A note in the margin. It says, a brief description of his beauties upon the Canticles, speaking of Solomon's beauty and the bridegroom or Christ's beauty reflected in the Song of Songs. Midrash HaNeelam's primary source document in the Sonnets is the Song of Songs or the Canticles. And 4 centuries of scholars missed her clue. Instead, it was left for a Bassano family descendant to reveal the truth at the appropriate time. No, I'm not, but my wife is. Even in the 17th century, Emilia, with her prophetic gifting, wrote of a great battle of the consciousness and conscience, where she foresaw the coming struggle, where, and I quote, love is too young to know what conscience, yet who knows not conscience is born of love. Sonnet 151 draws part 16 to a close with a triumphant prize of Jesus Christ meeting his beloved, the assembly of Israel, the daughters of Zion, the daughters of Jerusalem, a wonderful feminine metaphor for Israel and the loving, gracious, patient relationship God has with his people. Now, if you don't understand this, go and read Isaiah chapter 53, and you'll understand this passage a lot more. In the Zohar, the daughters of Zion are likened to Shekinah as mother, daughter, sister, in the same way Solomon spoke to the Shulamite. A deep, sensual, erotic love 60 times greater than sexual intercourse. This is compared to the 60 times in Deuteronomy, where Moses reminded the Israelites of God's promise that they would inherit and possess the land of Canaan, which is Israel, and the 60 breaths of King David when he awakened at midnight to pray and draw wisdom and strength from the Creator. Unfortunately, Rabbi Eliezer wrongly forecast it may occur in the year 1648. However, Emilia prophesied that Christ would return in the age of the woman, prior to the Hebrew year 6000, which means any time between now and nightfall on the 16th of September 2240 AD on the Gregorian calendar. Emilia clearly believed time was short when she wrote the Sonnets and Salve in the early 17th century, but she did not embrace the date of Rabbi Eliezer, for she prophesied of the age of the woman in the author's dream to the Lady Mary, referring to the age of Aquarius that began on the 29th of November 2020. She left countless secret codes within the Sonnets and within Salve Deus Rex Judaeorum for us to gather and collate. Emilia saw herself as a prophetess of ocular intellect, like Phoebe, who was commanded in the night to write thy never-dying fame, where few can equal it, as Emilia recorded in code. These lines record thy reverent name. What is that talking about? Yud He Vav He, King of the Jews. In the Sonnets, Emilia has confounded the greatest theologians in history. Even the early church, Polycarp, who was 69 to 155 AD, Origen of Alexandria, 184 to 254 AD, Basil of Caesarea, 330 to 379 AD, Jerome, 347 to 420 AD, Bernard of Clairvaux, 1090 to 1153 AD, Albertus Magnus, 1200 to 1280 AD, and even my favourite, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther, 1483 to 1546 AD. All these Christian theologians amount to nothing compared to the wisdom of Emilia Bassano. Yes, I honestly believe she opened the floodgates to wisdom far beyond her years that will be studied right up to Christ's return. That, my friends, is an overview. Next week, I'll have everything in place. I've got this setup started, but I hope to be able to present the sonnets in a new way going forward. My next episode will be on Sonnet 1. It's going to be a very interesting sonnet. I've already prepared the script, so get ready for it. And we will build on it course upon course all the way through to Sonnet 154. So thanks for watching, and bless you heaps.